So we're going to start recording now, and I guess we should probably maybe spotlight me for the moment. So we're recording this today in the hopes that we can share it after the fact with people who weren't able to make it. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Rowena Dash. I'm the executive director at the Neill-Cochran House Museum. I wish I had our virtual background behind me, but my computer apparently is too old. And I work for a nonprofit, so I'm not buying a new one. And it still works. So instead, you get the tiger behind me, which is my kitchen. I was born in the year of the tiger, 1974, which is why that's behind me. We're going to talk today about rum and about rum's history. We've got 23 people on here, and if you have a question, you're certainly welcome to just sort of say it out, but you also could add something to the chat. And Karen, so we also have on here, if you go to the gallery view, we've got Karen Kincaid Brady, who's in at least my upper left window. She's waving. And she's our business and programming director. Karen, the other Karen, did you see her email? Can you send her her registration link? Did you see that? And then we also have
sorry, who needs their registration link?
Karen Pope.
Yes, I will send it to her.
Thanks. Underneath Karen is two down is Catherine Whited, who is our weekend staff person. And she's currently sitting she's underneath Karen on the front porch of the Neill-Cochran House Museum to Karen's on the balcony. And then we have Anne Flemings, who apparently is in San Francisco, hanging out by the bridge. And she is our development director. So you got most of the staff in the Neill-Cochran House Museum with you today. I am going to share my screen, and hopefully the way this is all going to work is hopefully you'll still be able to see me. But at the same time, I'm going to be able to go through this presentation. This, to me, is just the most fun topic because I enjoy a good cocktail and am also fascinated with the way people lived hundreds of years ago, and in particular, just it's like a morbid fascination with how poor life was for them in many ways. And rum is really is a captivating story and really so expressive of so much of not just American history, but the history of the New World. So what you're seeing here actually is a vessel that never would have carried rum. It is a artist's rendition of La Belle, the ship that foundered off the coast of Texas that is now in the Bullock. And anyway, because of the association of rum with the sea, I went with that artist's rendition of the La Belle. So that's what you're seeing here. But you'll learn a little bit more about why that French ship never would have had rum on it. So what we're going to start with is making a rum shrub. And I was describing what shrub was a couple minutes ago. Here's mine right there. And it is, what I made was a pineapple ginger shrub. And shrub is basically a vinegar-based sugar syrup that allows you to preserve fruit out of season. And it has its sources in the 11th, 12th century, but really became popular during the 17th century and is, interestingly enough, particularly associated with the American colonies. There are two different kinds of shrub. There's a medicinal shrub, and then there that is alcohol-based, and then there is a vinegar shrub, and the medicinal shrub kind of stayed in Europe, and the vinegar shrub was popular in the colonies. You can make a shrub out of pretty much anything. My favorite shrub historically is a grapefruit, and that's easy to make. And your basic amounts, and there are tons of recipes on the internet that you can look at, but the basic amount is about a cup of fruit to a cup of sugar to a cup of vinegar. And what you do is, depending on the fruit, with the grapefruit, you have to kind of muddle the skin of the grapefruit in the sugar before you add the fruit itself. In the case of pineapple, you certainly don't want to use the skin, so don't do that. It's about 5 minutes worth of work and then you let it sit in your refrigerator for about a week. And over time, it will become less vinegary and more retain the flavor of the fruit itself. And so this is a super simple drink. It's 1.5 rum to 3/4. So basically it's 2 to 1. You could up the amount of rum and up the amount of shrub, and then you top it off.
Or 1 cup sugar, 1 cup vinegar is how you make a shrub.
So I got my shot glass, and
Shrub. 1 cup.
I mean, and this is also truly to taste.
1 cup
So
real,
I'm not particularly fussy about it. And then I'm actually going to use for
you muddle it first if it needs to be
rum.
muddled. You let it sit for a week or more.
Somebody, is that me? Or is that
No.
somebody else?
It's somebody else.
Okay. Yeah. Perhaps put yourself on mute if you're not talking. That way you can chat amongst yourselves and ignore me completely if you'd like. This is Cruzan. It's not a bad aged rum. It comes out of LaCroix. Really, rum for the most part comes out of the Caribbean. There are some people who are producing rum in the United States, and there were people who produced rum in the colonies. But for the most part, you're going to find rum coming out of the Caribbean. Each island has its own sort of, it'll have different types of flavors to it. And I am not enough of a connoisseur to be able to explain that terribly well. But you will find different flavor profiles from different areas. And you can totally do a shrub with a light rum as well. But I kind of like it doing it this way because it's has a little bit more of the flavor, frankly, to me, of tiki, of a tiki drink when you do it like this. And that's the one kind of rum drink that we're actually not going to get into at all today. And I'm topping it off with some Topo Chico. Topo Chico is my personal drink preference for sparkling water, not because it's trendy, but because it's the most carbonated of the sparkling waters, and so it ends up giving a real kind of zip to your drink. Cheers. And it's super good. So particularly when you do it with the pineapple, as I say, we're not going to talk about tiki. That's an entirely separate and really very large conversation, because tiki is so complex. But because I'm doing this with pineapple, the pineapple with the darker rum that's got a little bit kind of more of a caramelized flavor to it is a bit more reminiscent of the kinds of drinks that you might find in Hawaii. So I went with that, but super yummy. Okay. And I'm still standing, having mixed 1. The idea of mixing 4 is daunting. Okay. So while we're enjoying our shrub, which is truly, I guess I need to leave this up here, don't I? So that, I wonder if I can make it smaller. There we go. So y'all can still see me. While we're having shrub, which is, as I say, a really popular American beverage, why did colonists drink? Well, there were a lot of reasons to drink. First, and not most importantly, but one of the major reasons that colonists drank was that their water supply was not healthy. When the British colonists first arrived in the 17th century, people made a point of saying that they were so surprised that one could drink the water. They were not used to the ability to actually drink water that was not, bottled and coming to them. People would sell water through the streets because the local drinking water was not healthy. And the reason for that is that they were very dirty and sanitation standards were not what they are today. And everything basically ended up draining downhill into whatever your water supply was. And this was true in England and in Europe, and it became true in the colonies. Of course, it didn't start off that way, but as towns got bigger and there were more people with more animals and doing more things, within the first 20 years of kind of a municipality coming together, the water would no longer be drinkable. And I've got a quote in here that a man who arrived close to 1650 wrote later in a memoir that it was not accounted a strange thing in those days to drink water, which really is telling in the sense that that was something that was so remarkable. Another reason was community. Public houses were the center of communities. And as you see down below, in Britain at the end of the 16th century, there were 16,000 public houses. These were places that men came together to talk about politics, to do business. It's where people stayed overnight when they were traveling. And there were many places in the colonies that could not be considered a municipality or an incorporated town if they did not have at least one tavern. That was a requirement for actually becoming a town. So that was another reason that alcohol drinking was just sort of part of men's public personas, and this very much was men. Women were not allowed in these spaces. Women were at home, and that's not to say women did not drink, but they would not have been drinking in the same way that men were drinking as part of kind of their public life. I have to use this apparently. Okay. They also drank a lot. Many of you, I'm sure, have heard that John Adams reportedly drank 2 pints of cider every morning before breakfast. He was not unusual. When you look at the statistics, we would be under the table before the colonial Americans even got started if we went up against them in a drinking contest. Colonists 15 years and older drank per year. And so this is taking the number of people who lived in the colonies who were 15 and older. All of them drank 5 gallons of liquor, 34 gallons of beer, and a gallon of wine every year. So that's almost 2 shots a day, every day throughout the year, plus beer and wine for every single adult. That's crazy. I mean, just absolutely crazy. So if you imagine that not everybody was doing that, then, the people who were drinking were just drinking and drinking and drinking and drinking. In 1765, so 10 plus years before the American Revolution, Americans imported 5 million gallons of rum each year and then produced an additional 5 million gallons of rum domestically. These are, when you think about the number of people who lived in the colonies, these numbers are staggering. So what is rum? It's a byproduct of the sugar industry. And sugarcane actually did not originate in the New World. It was brought to the New World by Columbus, so we have him to thank for that. And it originated in Asia. And its growth within the British colonies in the 17th century coincided with the vast expansion of sugar consumption in Britain. And that, of course, the growth would be fueled by an expansion in consumption. But at the same time that sugar is being produced in the colonies in the Caribbean, you'll also see the beginning of a taste for tea and for cocoa, and a rise in the influence of coffee. So all of those things are happening at once. There's a really good book that I think may actually be called Sugar, that is about the impact of sugar in terms of changing Western civilization. And it goes into a lot of that. And also that the 17th century sees an actual decline in living standards for many people in Britain who were essentially, sugar became cheap enough that people were able to buy sugar and sort of subsist on it, but they were actually losing the nutritional value of what they had eaten before, which might resonate with some of the arguments about sugar over the past couple of decades in this country. And it's also true that rum was considered a highly caloric beverage, of course, certainly relative to water, but even also relative to beer. And one of the reasons that rum was served as extensively as it was and kind of pushed out into the Caribbean culture was that it was dirt cheap, and it had calories to it. So you might be drunk, but you were able to go about your business because you were taking in calories on at least some level. Okay, so that's sort of an aside. It was a combination of molasses with fermented wash from sugar vats. And historically, the mixture was heated with the vapors then distilled into liquor. The production of rum created a new and lucrative commodity from, and this is the best line you'll ever hear about rum from anybody, this distilled essence of fermented industrial waste. Basically, molasses was trash. People in the 17th century referred to it as no more valuable than dung, and in many cases less valuable than dung, because dung at least could be dumped on crops and used as a fertilizer. So it was really, in the production of sugar, there's for every 2 pounds of finished sugar, you ended up with 1 pound of molasses, which was just, as I say, it was waste, it was trash. And when the Barbadians, people in Barbados, seem to have been the first to really turn to rum, it was basically taking something that had no value and creating a very powerful and strong economic commodity from it. It's kind of an incredible thing.
Marina, before
yeah.
you go on, we had a question. Was the alcohol content as high as it is today?
So that's an interesting question. So one of the things I learned in the course of all of this was that the term proof, which, so this Cruzan is whatever it is, honestly on here, 40% alcohol, so it's 80 proof. That term actually comes from this time period. The way you would know that a liquor was highly enough alcoholic to be considered a liquor versus like a beer or a cider was you would put gunpowder in it, and then if the gunpowder lit on fire, it was considered proofed. That's where that term comes from. And that's all they knew. It wasn't until the 19th century that somebody invented a tool that would allow you to actually determine the alcohol content of your liquor. So it was very strong, but nobody really knows exactly how strong very strong was, because there simply weren't, none of it has survived from that time period to test, and there was no way of determining it at that point. Yeah, it's a good question, and I love the fact that now we know why it's called 80 proof. It always seemed like a kind of a random term for me. Okay, so sometimes rum, you're in Barbados, it's 1650, and you've got this nasty, sticky molasses, which is good for nothing. In fact, apparently there was this major rat problem in Barbados, and some people, low income people, tried to use molasses actually as a almost like tar, to tar their homes and kind of close up holes between boards of wood, and then it would dry out and it would sort of work until the rats came, and then the rats ate all the molasses and basically destroyed the homes. So there's no value in molasses. They figure out how to turn it into something that could be sold, but they're working with incredibly basic tools and in very rudimentary conditions. And I use the term alchemy intentionally. There are people who actually think that the alchemists, the medieval alchemists, are the first ones who sort of figured out distillation to begin with, as they were looking for the elixir of life. It was considered sort of a magical thing. So basically, you would heat the fermented beverage and pipe it out and cool it into a still, and it was the vapors that would then coalesce and return into water, condense, and that would be the liquor. To get the fermentation going, you needed yeast, and typically the molasses and this kind of fermented, this wash that was left over from the sugar making process would create yeast, and the whole thing would just sort of kind of begin to bubble on its own and do its own thing. But if they struggled to get the yeast to activate, one way of fixing that was to throw things into it, including apparently animal carcasses and dung got thrown into the vat in order to create the rum. And of course, at the time, you don't have Cruzan, you don't have Bacardi or Myers or Mount Gay or any of those names. These are just people on sugar plantations producing rum, putting it into barrels and selling it. So there's no sense of terroir. There's no sense of, single proprietor rum. It's just rum. And so there was really no oversight, and there was also no accountability. You didn't know where your barrel came from ultimately, particularly if it ended up getting sent to the American colonies. So yeah, they would dump stuff in it, and as a result, it was horrible, right? The taste of this was just nasty. The earliest term parallel to rum. So there's a rum bouillon is one word that was used in the 17th century, early 17th century, mid 17th century for rum. But at the same time, coming out of Barbados, which is, as I say, is where this all kind of began, was the term kill devil. And that was kind of consistently used as the term for rum around that time. And I've just included several people who had made comments about it. It was rough and disagreeable, a hot, hellish, and terrible liquor, and not very pleasant in taste. And the last guy was like, he's your consummate Brit. Like he went over there and he commented sort of sardonically on a variety of different topics, and he was very British in his comments, but so not very pleasant in taste was damning, with faint praise from Richard Ligon. But one of the things they did realize was that travel improved rum, both because transport was slow at the time, and so it took a while to get from one place to another, and so in a sense you were sort of cellaring it by putting it on a boat. And then also the movement of the vessel, the heat of being out at sea, the salt air, all of those things ended up impacting these barrels of rum. And so imported rum was always better than domestic rum, regardless of where it came from. And there was a point in time in the late 17th century where, for instance, domestic rum was selling for 7 shillings for however much, and imported rum was 17 shillings. So people recognized that the imported stuff was better than the local stuff, but they didn't really understand why. And so it would take a long time to get to the point where there was any real concerted effort to produce a better rum. So rum was basically the Xerox or Coke or Kleenex of the colonial period. It was so prevalent that it became a catch-all term for all liquor. Whiskey, cider, those were things that were typically distilled by people on their own farms, and they were not, they didn't make it out into the public houses and the taverns. That was really where you would find beer and rum. So whiskey stayed home, and really until you get to the late colonial period in the American Revolution, when, and really the American Revolution was, did great things for whiskey because it shut down all international trade. And as a result, all people really had to drink was whiskey. And so that was the beginning of the transition, and domestically produced rum. But of course, where is the molasses coming from for the domestically produced rum? It's coming from the Caribbean, which is, no longer accessible to the colonists. And then the British colonial system set rum up for success. American colonists were seen by the Crown as nothing but consumers. I mean, that was their purpose. They were an outlet for products being produced by the empire. Across many different sectors, colonists were prohibited from manufacturing themselves. And so they were only able to produce and export raw materials. Their job was to cut down forests and send the wood back over. And then their job was to manufacture cotton. But they certainly were not supposed to be turning that cotton into fabric. That's why homespun became such a political statement during the American Revolution. And this doesn't necessarily happen so much with rum. They figure out that they can distill it themselves, and so they start importing. And of course, the Caribbean islands have even more molasses than they're able to offload into rum themselves, and so they're happy to get the silly Americans to pay them for it. So Americans do start producing rum, but in that early period, they were seen as truly just the end consumer. And so rum is just pumped into the American colonies. And beyond that, so the Caribbean, they put all of their efforts into producing sugarcane and no effort into producing a way to feed themselves. So the colonists were sending back edible food. So the rum would come to the colonies, American colonies, and then they would send food back to the Caribbean, to the British colonies in the Caribbean. And so that was, a two-way trade. I'm not going to begin to get into slavery today. The triangle trade, all that was another huge element of all of this, but it's really, it's its own topic. And so, but that's certainly all tied up in this as well. Okay, so now we're theoretically done with our shrub. We're gonna move on to the dark and stormy. This is in here really because I love dark and stormies more than anything else. But there is another there's a good reason for it as well. And that is the importance of sea travel to the history of rum. So, all right, I'm gonna grab a tall glass this time. And different people have different views on what the right dark rum is for a dark and stormy. I've always liked Myers. That's this one, which comes out of Jamaica. There is also Gosling. Gosling's super popular, and there's Mount Gay. And Mount Gay is actually, I believe today it is known as the longest consecutive distilling, it's been distilling rum longer than anybody else anywhere. So everybody's got their favorites. The darker, the better, I think, is really, so I wouldn't have wanted to use Cruzan. It's just, that aged rum. It's not going to have quite the potency that will stand up to the ginger beer. So taking some dark rum, filling the glass with ice, and I'm doing that because one of the people on here tonight, Kate Hill, who goes to Bermuda, Kate, is that right? Is it Bermuda or the Bahamas? I think she's Bermuda every year, which lucky her. Says that when you're there and you go to a bar, I'm going to see if I can do this. A bartender like kind of knows their stuff when they bring you your rum in a glass, but they wait to pour the ginger beer on. And when you pour the ginger beer on, if you pour it right, you'll see it. Oh, I'm going the wrong way with going. You see that it becomes sort of a dark and stormy sky. So, see if I did that. Hopefully I more or less did that right. And then there are people who are of two minds on this subject as well, whether lime juice belongs in a dark and stormy or not. I am a fan of lime juice, and so I use it. And because I happen to have some Central Market lime juice, I'm not squeezing lime, I just dump some in. And that is truly one of my favorite drinks. As a short aside, I went to a wedding on Block Island, which is off the coast of Rhode Island, a number of years ago, and it's near Providence. And it's a big, there are no cars, you've got to go there by boat, and it's a big space for people who are sailors, like yacht sailors, like fancy sailors. And so that I went to a wedding and we drank a lot of these, and yet I didn't get tired of them. But they have become the drink of sailing people, and I think the reason they became the drink of sailing people is in part because of this long connection of the sea and rum. And it's a pretty easy drink to make on a boat, to be honest. But it also connects back to grog. And so we'll get to grog in a second. But basically, rum, through Captain Morgan and Robinson Crusoe and Treasure Island, has been long associated with people who are on the sea, and in particular piracy. Piracy, interestingly, was very much associated with the British. Many of the best known pirates began as privateers, which basically meant that they were not employed by the British Navy, but they were encouraged to go make trouble for particularly the Spanish, but the Spanish and the French. As a result of that, so interestingly enough, the early pirates actually had nothing to do with rum. And the reason for that is that they tended to attack the French and the Spanish. And the French and the Spanish did not export rum. They didn't produce much rum, but it was illegal to export rum because they were worried that it would conflict with the value of brandy. So these early pirates, when they would plunder ships, there was no rum to plunder. There was no rum on board. It was basically brandy. And so what they would drink was brandy. But what you see happening is, what happens is that, particularly, as I say, with Treasure Island, that's where yo-ho and a bottle of rum comes from. It comes from Treasure Island. But the kind of British literature brings rum in connection with piracy. Then into the 20th century, you end up with Captain Morgan. And Captain Morgan, oh, that's a typo. It was actually created at the end of World War II by Seagram as a blend of various rums from different distillers. It was so popular. It was introduced in 1949, and it was so popular that Seagram ended up purchasing a distillery in order to make it themselves in the early 50s. And it was originally actually a light rum intended for mixers, like what we think of Bacardi as being today. And it wasn't until the 1980s that they turned it into a spiced rum. Basically what happened was that rum fell out of favor, Americans in the United States, and Americans were looking at, wine spritzers and very, very, very light drinks, kind of moved away from the heavy, cloying cocktail that had kind of ruled the day since Prohibition. And so as a result, Seagram saw itself, losing money, and they decided to turn it into a spiced rum. And they were quite successful. And as of at least 10 years ago, I don't know about today, but it made it up for 1/3 of the entire rum industry in the United States. We're not drinking any Captain Morgan today. Now, so the reason for the for the dark and stormy, the British Navy. They started plying their sailors with rum as early as 1655, and it was a lot of rum. Original by the 1740s, the ration was the equivalent of drinking 5 cocktails per day, and this was ladled out to every seaman within the British Navy. However, Admiral Edward Vernon was looking at his Navy and realizing that they were not nearly as efficient as they could be. And he decided that basically the sailors were all drunk all the time and they needed to do something about it. And he was very well respected actually by his sailors, and they loved him. And what he decided to do when he said, we can't get rid of rum. We're not going to get rid of it completely. But what we could do is dilute it. And if you diluted it, and also divided the daily ration between 2 different times of day, maybe people wouldn't be so completely drunk all the time. In order to make sure that that you didn't end up with a mutiny because the sailors thought they weren't getting what they were supposed to get, they actually said they would barrel their own rum. The British Navy had its own rum and they had their own kind of formula for it. And then the mixing would actually happen in public on the deck to reassure the soldiers that there was nothing was being done with their rum ration. So the term for this became known as grog. And grog was rum mixed with water, but then also one of the things that Vernon allowed to happen was he allowed the sailors to turn in some of their ration cards for bread and salt for sugar and limes. And the idea was that would make the grog more palatable to them. So he recognized that the rum, remember, we're back in this, rum doesn't taste great. It's important to be able to mix it with things because it's not very good on its own. This is not a sipping liquor. So he he ended up being the creator of this proto cocktail, which was a combination of rum, sugar, water, and lime, called grog. And they called him Old Grogram because of the type of coat he wore. And so they called the rum grog for short. Where does the ginger beer come in? Well, I mean, that's a little bit of artistic license, but at the same time, you would mix rum with anything that had a powerful flavor to it in order to improve the flavor. And that was often citrus, but you could also mix it with things like ginger and cinnamon and nutmeg. And you see that a lot in recipes for different kinds of punch in the American colonies. So I think that the dark and stormy, this is a long circular way of saying that the dark and stormy is modern grog. It is a gentrified and rarefied and much more drinkable grog than what the Navy was entitled to. 19th century, they cut the ration in half in 1823 and then did it again in 1850. So by 1850, you're at maybe 1.5 cocktails a day being handed out to the British Navy. And then that persisted onward. Fewer and fewer sailors actually wanted the rum, apparently, but it didn't go away completely until July 31st, 1970, which is referred to in the British Navy as Black Tot Day. The last day a rum ration was ladled out, and apparently sailors wore black armbands. They made this big thing of it, and everybody at this point was basically, you're a professional Navy, you shouldn't be handing out rum while people are on duty. So everybody was behind it, and they held mock funerals, and the very last boat, so as they approached the international date line, the very last boat to do its last grog, dispensing threw all the barrels into the water, and there was a 21-gun salute, and that was the end of grog with the British Navy. So, moving on. The Hemingway daiquiri. A basic daiquiri is white rum, lime juice, and simple syrup, and that's it, basically, and ice. The Hemingway daiquiri is a more rarefied version of it, and it includes both grapefruit juice and maraschino liqueur. Maraschino liqueur, I'll show you the bottle. This is one of my favorite things that I have, become acquainted with over the past few years. And I just sort of assumed when I first tried it that it would taste like cherries and be sort of sweet and kind of horrible, actually. But it doesn't taste anything like cherries. When you open it up, what you actually smell, it more or less smells like almond extract. And it's really fabulous. I was saying before that this is actually really great mixed in coffee instead of like the moaning syrup stuff. This is just a little bit of it in your coffee, and great flavor. So I thought, because it might be more fun to make a Hemingway daiquiri than something else. The big thing with the daiquiri, which I can't really replicate today, is that it was known for it's known for the little shards of ice that you ended up with when you made your drink. And I don't think I have the capacity to do that in my cocktail shaker, but I suppose you can't drink it anyway, so it doesn't matter. But that is an element of the daiquiri, is it's supposed to have kind of these, as you violently shake it up, you end up with these little shards of glass as you imagine being in hot Cuba, and you end up with these little bits of ice on the hot afternoon. Really quite refreshing. So we'll go to I'm using Appleton, and I'll explain why in a second. Why not Bacardi? Appleton is another Jamaican rum, and I'm going to get myself a clean shot glass for this. And all right, I think I'm going to actually just do this as half a drink. So an ounce of white rum, mostly because I've already got 2 half-drunk drinks. And then a little bit of lime juice, kind of a third of a thing of lime juice. Bit of grapefruit juice. This is when we're lucky we live in Texas, right? So use about half of that of the grapefruit juice. Literally a splash of the maraschino liqueur. And then also a splash of simple syrup. All right. Shake that up, and it makes actually a really pretty color. I don't know if you saw that, but the top flew off. So we'll go with and then theoretically, I can't believe the top fell off, and I'm now covered in daiquiri, as is my computer. There we go. Well, what I can show you maybe is that I did that violently enough that you do end up with shards of ice. And it's so tasty. I mean, it's actually, you can barely taste the alcohol, which I think probably makes it a bit dangerous. Now that I think about it. Clean off my, you can't see the entire floor, but it's covered in daiquiri now. Okay. So back to the history of rum. Rum lost some of its allure in the 19th century with the rise of whiskey, although it did remain popular. In fact, temperance advocates railed against the demon rum as a catch-all for all liquor, liquor. Remember, it's kind of the Coke or the Kleenex of its time. And that term, demon rum, continues on into Prohibition. So rum may have lost some of the cachet. And of course, whiskey at this point is being produced domestically and is being produced with a bit more attention to detail, I would say. So you're beginning to see, high class, high quality whiskeys in a way that you don't see with rum. And so if you're looking to drink something that's going to be a higher quality beverage, you're going to go to the whiskey rather than rum. So that's another reason for its kind of falling out of favor. But rum saw a resurgence after the Spanish-American War, when Teddy Roosevelt and his Rough Riders were off in Cuba, and they experienced rum and experienced things like daiquiris, and came back talking about them and looking for that kind of a drink. And then, in particular, with Prohibition, you end up with really the rise again of rum. So what happened with Prohibition? Well, first of all, Bacardi. Bacardi is really, if rum is the Kleenex or Coke of liquors, Bacardi is the Coke or Pepsi of rums. In many cases, people, even today, you hear Bacardi, you think rum, and for many people, you don't need to go any further than that. That's just what you buy because that is the name. The Bacardi family arrived in Cuba from 1836. They were from Catalonia, from northeast Spain. And it's funny because I've always known the name Bacardi, and it's not a name that sounds particularly Spanish, as in Cuban Spanish. And I did not learn until maybe 10 years ago that they were Catalan. And so Bacardi would have been the way they said their name in Catalonia. So they originally imported wine and sold spirits, but in 1862, they purchased a distillery. The distillery had a colony of bats. And the people nearby called that rum the bat drink. And the Bacardis, who could see a good marketing opportunity when it presented itself, put a bat on their logo to differentiate their rum from other rums. And that's another completely different story. The kind of marketing of liquor really changes with Prohibition in the 20th century because you wanted to know that you were buying something that was legitimate because there were so much black market, poor quality, and frequently often actually dangerous alcohol out there. That's really when this idea of labels catches on in the United States, at least. But in Cuba, where many people remained illiterate, having the bat on the label was something that people could point to and know what they were getting. The Bacardis really are most important, though, for their work in filtration. We're still in the 19th century at the point where rum's not great. It doesn't taste great. And they were able to remove some of the kind of oily and unpleasant, off-putting elements of rum, probably through a combination of charcoal and sand. The family still owns the trademarks and is very secretive about the whole thing, but that's likely what they did. They, however, fled Cuba in 1961, leaving behind all their equipment and their contacts, and then what you see on the right, which is the downtown tower. This is not the original like bat tower, if you will, from the distillery. They built a tower in downtown Havana, designed by, or I don't know that the building was designed by, but it was embellished by Maxfield Parrish. And it's still there today. It is one of the iconic buildings in downtown Havana, even still. And they took their trademarks with them. They figured out a way somehow to be able to get out of Cuba, and even though they had to leave behind everything, they retained the brand, which is not true of Havana Club, which was another 19th century brewery that the Cuban government actually took over and the Havana Club brand is still out there. Bacardi moved over to, I believe they bought land in both Jamaica and Puerto Rico. And what's interesting is that the quality of Bacardi actually declined after they left Cuba. And they became kind of what we know Bacardi as today, which is just sort of a mass rum with really not a lot going for it, which is why I'm drinking Appleton, which has a lot more flavor to it. I mean, Bacardi has become almost like grain alcohol, and it doesn't just have as much inherent flavor to it as it once did. And I feel like there was supposed to be another slide in here, but I don't see it. So on to the mojito. Well, I'm gonna make a half of that too. Oh, another thing about the daiquiri. The reason I'm drinking the daiquiri out of this glass, well, there are two reasons. One, I don't have any martini glasses because we got rid of them because I don't like them. And they end up, I feel like you always spill out of martini glasses, which is ironic since I just spilled all over myself making the drink. The second reason is you're never supposed to drink a daiquiri in a glass like this, because you want the ice to last as long as possible. And in the heat of Cuba, anything you can possibly do to avoid touching the glass and making the ice melt faster, you want to do. And so you're always supposed to drink a daiquiri out of a glass with a stem. And so that's what I'm doing here. And this tastes nothing like what we as a culture have turned a daiquiri into in terms of you know, the frozen things, and it's really more sugar, more fruit than anything else. This has a much more delicate flavor to it. Okay, so the mojito is also Cuban. So really, when you think about rum, important though it has been to the American experience, it begins and it ends with the islands. The mojito is probably a drink produced by farmers in Cuba in the late 19th century. That's what people think. It is similar to, it's basically, in many ways, it's a daiquiri, but with some mint. So I'm gonna take my mint. So I've got a decent amount of mint in this glass, and I've got a muddler here. I'm actually gonna add, so again, I'm gonna do this as half a drink because I think that's smarter for me. So I've added just a little bit of simple syrup, and because I'm doing this in this glass, which is, you know, breakable and stuff, but it makes it visible, I'm gonna be very careful with my muddling. So you just basically kind of mush it up a little bit, and I can smell the flavors, the oils coming out of the mint, and if you can see that, you can see kind of a little bit of mint stuck to the bottom of the muddling tool. And then a bit of lime juice. Again, I'm gonna go with kind of 1/3 of an ounce of that. And then, where's this? I'm not gonna do the stupid thing again, which is to try to use my shaker. Ounce of rum, and basically I'm just gonna mix all that up, add ice to it, Topo Chico, assuming I can find my bottle of Topo Chico. Yep. And, all right. And then you just top it off with a sprig of mint. And now, why'd they use mint? Again, this was not high quality rum, at least until the 20th century. And so you ended up wanting to blend it with anything that was going to kind of mask the flavor of the product. So people were trying to drink, they were trying to, you know, enjoy that experience, the experience of liquor, but they didn't really want to taste what they were drinking too much. So there you have it. I'm going to stop sharing my, next screen. A lot of the material that went into what I said today comes from Wayne Curtis and a Bottle of Rum, A History of the World in 10 Cocktails. It is a great book. He is an incredibly entertaining writer. Those of you who know me well, he writes like I'd like to write. I mean, he tells it like it is. He's funny, and he doesn't pull any punches. If he doesn't think something is good, he'll let you know about it. And he goes all the way from the beginning up to the growth of mojito bars right around 2000. Drinkandlearn.com. This came from Karen O'Quinn. Elizabeth Pierce is a drinks historian, and she's got a podcast. And it's just really entertaining to listen to her talk about drinks. She's got a friend, Abigail, who is a bartender, mixologist, and the two of them just chat about different things. I found the podcast about bitters, an hour. It was fascinating. So I encourage her website to you. And then Tom Standage, A History of the World in 6 Glasses. At least as of a couple of years ago, his book was required reading for U.S. History AP students. He goes through rum, coffee, tea, Coke. I can't remember what the other two, beer. I'm forgetting the other one. But anyway, he has chapters on all of these drinks and the important role that they have played in world history. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. How's everybody doing? You still upright? Has anybody else spilled on themselves, or is it just me?
That last book could be fun for the next book club, the History of 6
History of the World in 6 Drinks? Yeah, I have not read it. And A Bottle of Rum I've now read twice, but I've not read A History of the World in 6 Drinks, and I like that idea. Yeah. I will have the ability to share that presentation, I hope. It doesn't have anything big in it, so it'll be a small file, so it's shareable. If we can figure out how to do that, I'm certainly happy to send it around to everybody.
Rowena, this is Ann. We think you've missed your calling.
You know, I've thought about that. Elizabeth Pierce is living my best life.
Yeah, it's kind of frightening. It's wonderful. The blend of history. I'm fascinated with the whole thing.
Yeah, no, it's I love this stuff. And you know, I enjoy drinking it too, but I've now got 4 cocktails in front of me. I mean, I'm enjoying sipping on them, but I don't need to drink all 4 cocktails. I'd rather talk about them than drink them. So yeah, but at least nobody else spilled on themselves like I did.
That just added to it.
Right. Aren't we glad we're recording?
Yes.
Does anybody have any questions? Anything I can tell you? We'd be happy to talk about what we're doing at the museum. I can answer more questions about rum.
I did want to share with everyone. I've got this rum. I told Rowena a little bit about it. It's called High Rum, and it's a Texas. Little hard to see because of my virtual background. I apologize. I'll send pictures when I send out the other information. But so it's from High, Texas, which is outside of Johnson City. So once quarantine goes down, I encourage you to go check it out. It's really good rum. It's got really good flavor. I've got a dark rum and a honey rum. And so the dark rum has a really nice vanilla flavor to it. And then the honey has just a nice little sweetness to it. I added it to my Hemingway daiquiri, and it gave it a really nice sweet taste. So I just wanted to tell you all about that you don't have to go too far in Texas to get a nice local Texas rum.
I've been through High a couple of times and gotten some of their stuff. They're good.
Well, it's a good point that these drinks, I mean, I'm kind of used to like an old-fashioned.
Christopher Allen.
Is an old-fashioned, right? And I'm sure that's not entirely true, but it's sort of true. Rum drinks are so profoundly changed by the specific rum that you put in them. It can be a completely different drink from one rum to another. So it's a lot of fun to experiment with them for that reason.
Yeah, I was going to say that I like dark rums in everything. I don't actually put a white rum in anything if I can help it.
Interesting. Yeah, well, I mean, I have not tried to make a mojito out of a dark rum, but it would have a whole lot. Are you drinking one now? And
Yeah.
so how it wouldn't have that clean flavor. It's got more caramel, I guess. What's
And also, instead of a simple syrup, I used agave syrup.
I was just going to ask if you could do that. So that I'm glad to know. Thank you.
Syrup, I used agave syrup, it adds more body. And then that dark rum, it's an entirely different drink. It's a sipper. It's not like most time mojitos are quaffers. You just throw them down. This you would set and drink as a cocktail, just one of them, and enjoy it rather than just having to have a bunch of sort of lemony tasting rum. This has more body and depth. If it's dark rum, a good aged rum, and agave syrup for the simple syrup.
You definitely use less agave syrup though. You can't go 1-to-1 with your recipe. It's just because the agave syrup is so sweet and so viscous.
You know, I always cut back on the sugar that I put in my drinks anyway, but yes, we cut it in half.
Well, so Hemingway preferred no sugar added to his daiquiri, just for what it's worth.
He was diabetic.
Well, right, and you know, he was really being very careful about his health. But yes, he one of his one of the nods he made to health was to not include the
grapefruit juice and maraschino liqueur that took the place of the simple syrup.
Right. Yeah. No, very true. Yeah. Anybody else have thoughts? No, we've drunk you all into a stupor.
Rowena, I'm looking at this Bacardi rum.
Yeah.
I bought, and it is like it doesn't have a complex flavor. I never realized that about rum before until you mentioned how, you know, you try and build everything on top of it to kind of build the taste.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, so this is one of those moments where we're really glad we weren't colonial Americans. Really glad, because everything in fact, Wayne Curtis, one of the things he said was he has been unable to find a single positive comment about rum in the entirety of the 17th century.
That's amazing because it's such a ubiquitous word. And I mean, people think about rum with that time.
And they drank it, but it was terrible. Yeah. So, I mean,
because they were desperate, I guess, right?
Right. And the concept of the sipping rum, of really high quality rum, it's a 20th century concept. I mean, it didn't happen till then. This is Zacapa, which comes from, I want to say Venezuela. Guatemala, right. And interestingly enough, apparently it has now been bought by, is it Diageo? It's been bought by one of the big ones. And apparently, so this was known as one of the best rums in the world. And it was barreled on mountain height, heavily aged. This one is aged 23 years, I want to say, something like that.
But it says Solera.
23. It's altitude is 2,300 meters. It's 23 years old. Yeah. So they are now making making rums that are not this. They still have the high quality one, but it is possible to buy Zacapa that is not quite as. But this, when you smell this, it's almost like a bouquet of a port. More like a Madeira. It's more like a Madeira than a port. It's not quite as thick and viscous as a port, but I mean, this is a sipping rum, and such things did not exist in the colonial period. So you now today have the opportunity. I mean, I've got several back here that I haven't touched today that are all incredibly high quality, worth drinking on their own as well as mixing. The cloying cocktail, that term, comes out of Prohibition because, you know, rum quality was still poor, but then all alcohol quality practically. I mean, you were trying to mask something that was, in many cases, pseudo-medicinal in flavor And so that's when people start dumping in all these fruit juices and making really sweet cocktails. Bathtub gin was so bad that the bee's knees, which is one of the only gin cocktails I like, it came out of specifically, it's simple syrup and lemon juice and gin. And the simple syrup and the lemon juice were particularly effective at masking the quality of the really horrific gin. So that Prohibition era is when you really started to see that sugar concentration go up in drinks because the quality went down. Although the rum quality really didn't have very far to fall, to be fair. It was really pretty horrible. Yeah.
I've got a question.
Uh-huh.
This is Karen. I'll turn on my picture.
Hi, Karen.
Hi.
There you are. Hi.
I was just looking in our amazing assortment of liquors, most of them inherited from Alex's father. And I see as souvenirs from my multiple trips to Martinique, where I went for my dissertation research, a whole bunch of rum from Martinique. How did it fare in the sources you consulted?
Well, Martinique was a French colony, correct?
Right.
Yeah. So the French produced, to the degree they produced rum at all, which was not great. And so, of course, the French colonies and Spanish colonies were also producing sugar, but they were very much discouraged, the planters, from producing rum because they didn't want to, the planters didn't care, but the crown did not want to create competition with brandy. Mm-hmm. So not as much was produced there. What was produced in the French colonies was frequently called rhum agricole, which has a grassier flavor to it. It is made somehow it's made more from raw sugar cane than from molasses. So there's a difference between what rum agricole is versus what rum that we think of distilled from molasses is. So I will admit, I have not had a rum agricole, so I can't speak to it personally.
Well, I'll have to share some of this with you. I see 4 bottles. So in the 20th century sort of repositioning of rum in the menu, so to speak, do the Martinique and things, do they register on the meter at all, or are they disregarded?
Yeah, they're not real popular, but it is a different type of rum.
Yeah,
it was made from fresh cane pressing, not from molasses.
Yes.
And, if you've got the palate for that, it is excellent. It's really great as white rum.
It's a huge industry there now.
It tastes more like a whiskey. It tastes like Irish whiskey to me.
Yeah, it's not correct, but you're asking about the value of what might have been handed down to you. If it's before 1960, it's very high value right now.
No, it would have been after 1978.
Yeah, it still might be worth trading if that's what you're into.
Okay. Nah, it's just a curiosity in our cabinet. We consume almost nothing, but here it is.
Got it.
Maybe I need to get it over to the Dash household.
I think we would certainly try it. It's interesting to sip different things, right?
Happy to share.
And worth doing that. That is not going to be. That's not just a basic bottle of Bacardi, right? It's going to have its own flavor profile and be worth drinking from that standpoint. Yeah.
The comparison would be interesting. Right. Thank you very much. This is really interesting.
Well,
you did a great job.
Anybody else have anything they'd like to share?
Rowena, would you be available for a rebroadcast of this to my SAR chapter? They would love this.
Yeah, let me take a picture and show you what my kitchen looks like. Sure. The answer, sure, Sam. Happy to do it. But my kitchen looks like this right now. If I can share that picture.
Oh my goodness.
And of course, I'm a mess. Maybe the second time through, I won't spill all over myself. We'll happy to do it. We are also, what's that?
We'll have to require some mandatory memberships to the Neill-Cochran.
There you go. There you go. Yeah, send me an email. I'd be happy to do it. Right now, I've got nothing but time, right?
Great job.
Speaking of which, Sam was nice enough to mention our name once again. The Neill-Cochran House Museum is, we are happy to be able to host things like this. We prefer to do them, of course, in person. We often host historic happy hours connected to a lecture that doesn't have anything to do with drinking, but giving us an opportunity to share a colonial cocktail or a 19th century or more recently 20th century cocktails. So hope you'll both tune in again, and then also we'd love to see you at the museum when we are able to reopen. That would make us all so happy. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks for sending the virtual pictures for our back, for our
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, that was a great idea. Great idea.
I'll have to work on that.
We're working on adding a few more as we go too.
Oh good.
The virtual pictures of what?
We have virtual, so you can see that Karen Kincaid Brady and Catherine Whitehead both have the backdrop of the Neill-Cochran House Museum behind them.
Oh,
Yeah.
I see. Cool. Yeah.
So, one last thing. So Catherine, you did this last time. You want to take a shot of everybody. So if you're willing to share your video, we'd love, hi Milam. We'd love to toast together to getting through COVID-19 and sharing a drink in person very, very, very soon. So cheers, everybody.
Cheers.
Cheers. 3.
Oh, awesome. Oh, let's give everybody a second. Yeah, everybody.
Oh, sorry.
All right, you good?
All right, everybody ready? Cheers.
Okay, here we go.
Cheers.
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 All right, be safe, be well, and we'll hope to see y'all soon.
Bye.
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 Bye-bye.